The Vikings just beat one of the best teams in the NFL. Then the Packers are continuing to climb even without Jordan Love. Meanwhile, the Rams are spiraling out of control due to all of these injuries. Then the Saints are on a huge hot streak, but is it enough to get them into the top 10? Find out all that and more as I go through my updated power rankings for Week 3 of the 2024 NFL season, right after... All right, Week 2 is come and gone, and the landscape of the NFL is becoming more and more clear, kind of, sort of, I guess, with each passing week. This week's rankings will possibly age poorly, but I'm doing my best to look at this objectively and honestly based on who they're playing, how the team looks from an injury standpoint, and all that good stuff. At the end of the day, you may disagree, and that's fine with me. Now, it's worth noting before we dive into this that a handful of teams who won their Week 2 games did slide down the power rankings out of default because teams that were previously behind them may have had a massive upset win. On the other hand, some teams that lost may actually move up a spot or two because teams that were ahead of them last week suffered a bad loss this week and moved way down the list. Now, with all that out of the way, let's start at 32 and work our way up. Of course, we're going to start with the Carolina Panthers. I mean, do we really need an explanation here? 2 blowout losses. Bryce Young just got benched for Andy Dalton, and the organization is a complete disaster. At 31, I have the Giants, who just lost to the Commanders in a game where Washington didn't score a single touchdown. If I had to guess, Daniel Jones is soon going to join Bryce Young on the bench, but we shall see there. At 30 is the Broncos, who are also 0-2. Bo Nix needs to see the eye doctor that Sam Darnold went to, or maybe Bill Murray, because he is definitely seeing ghosts out there on the football field. The Titans are at 29 with a pretty talented roster, to be honest, but as long as Will Levis keeps making boneheaded plays, they're going to have a tough time winning games. I have the Commanders at 28, who got their first win of the season over the Giants, big deal, and moved up 3 spots. Their defense is not good, giving up 27.5 points per game, but if they learn how to convert in the red zone, they are tied for 24th in red zone TD percentage. They could have a dangerous or more dangerous looking offense. The Bears, meanwhile, fell 5 spots from last week after losing to the Texans, with Caleb Williams looking like a deer in the headlights. I mean, it doesn't help that his offensive line is made out of bubble gum and duct tape, so for now, Chicago is at 27th, but they should climb up here eventually, I think. I mean, they have so many playmakers on offense. They've got to rise, right? Then the Colts suffered a brutal loss to Malik Willis and the Packers, with Anthony Richardson throwing 3 picks as they fell to 0-2 and moved down 7 spots in the rankings. We'll see what happens with the Colts from here, but yeah, it's been a bit rough over there for now. The Patriots moved up 1, mostly because of the Colts' downfall. They beat Cincy last week and took Seattle to overtime this week. The run game is real and the defense is legit. So once Drake May gets up to speed and they get some weapons at receiver, they could be a really good team. It just might not be this year, though they do look better than I thought they would so far out there this season. The Rams, they took the biggest nosedive, going from 12 last week all the way to 24. They've been ravaged by injuries. Their O-line was already banged up. Jonah Jackson just got put on IR, and then Puka Nacua and John Johnson are also on IR. Cooper Kupp is banged up as well, but it doesn't look like he's being placed on IR just yet. And while they do have Matt Stafford, a top 5 QB, and Sean McVay, a top 5 head coach, in my opinion, in the NFL, sometimes you simply can't overcome the massive amount of injuries you have as a team, and that's what's going on with the Rams right now. Plus, they got obliterated by the Cardinals and thus took quite the fall on this list. However, the Cardinals are on the rise. We'll get to them soon. The Jags are next at 23, and they themselves took a little stumble here. Their defense is solid, but Trevor Lawrence has looked flat out not good through 2 weeks. I'm trying to be generous here, but they've lost 7 of their last 8 games going back to last season, and they better figure it out soon, or Dougie Fresh may find himself on the way out sooner rather than later. I don't know if it's mid-season or anything like that, but he could be on his way out at the conclusion of the season if they do not turn it around. Next, the Raiders jumped up to 22 after an impressive comeback win against the Ravens in Baltimore. And if you want to put them up there a little bit higher, I wouldn't even argue with you here. Devontae Adams was heavily involved, and Brock Bowers now has the most receptions of any rookie tight end through the first 2 weeks in NFL history. We'll just have to wait and see if Gardner Minshew can keep it going for an entire season. I have the Browns next at 21, and despite getting blown out in week 1, I still think their defense is among the best in the league. Deshaun looked better. I mean, it's only up from how he performed in week 1, but he looked better week 2, and if they can get things clicking on offense, they can string together some wins for sure. Now, the Cardinals moved up to 20 after their blowout win over the Rams, and their offense is no joke. Second most points in the league. Kyler Murray is balling out. Marvin Harrison Jr. scored 2 early touchdowns, and they have weapons galore on offense. The only thing that's keeping them at 20 right now is the questions I have about their defense. The Dolphins took a mighty fall now from 9 to 19 after getting blown out by the Bills and having Tua land on IR after another concussion. It'll be an uphill climb the rest of the season for them, but they still have one of the most talented rosters in football. Tua again could come back, and Mike McDaniel should be able to scheme them a handful of wins in his absence. Kirk O'Chains pulled off the game-winning drive in Philly and moved the Falcons up 6 spots to 18. He looked much better than he did in week 1, even though it took a little while to get him kind of warmed up and going in this game. And if they could find some consistency, they could make a run at what has suddenly become a pretty competitive division in the NFC South, aside from the Panthers. Now, the Falcons shouldn't have won the game. They did against the Eagles, to be clear, but they did. Some teams just find a way, and with all the talent they have on the roster, I could see them winning some more games for sure. Then Malik Willis proved everyone, including myself, wrong and led the Packers to a win over the Colts. Their run game, Josh Jacobs looks incredible out there, and their defense also played fantastic. And with Jordan Love reportedly aiming to make a comeback in week 4, they could once again be on the rise pretty soon. The Steelers find themselves at 16 here with one of, if not the best defense in football. Their offense is brutal, but as long as they don't turn the ball over, they can lean on that defense just like they did in weeks 1 and 2. The Seahawks squeaked by the Patriots in overtime on Sunday, and while they're now sitting at 2-0, I feel like 15 is a good spot for them at the moment as a fringe playoff team. This may ruffle some Seahawk feathers, but I have the Bengals ahead of them at the moment, despite being 0-2. They've lost by a combined 7 points through 2 weeks, just barely losing to the Chiefs at Arrowhead in week 2. So if Burrow can stay healthy, I really can't see them missing the playoffs, even though, again, 0-2 is a tough start for Cincy. You got to climb out of that, but that is nothing new for them. They typically start out slow and then start to heat up as the season moves along. Plus, the Bengals also play the Commanders, Panthers, Giants, and Browns within the next 5 weeks, so I definitely see them to bounce back from a record standpoint. Aaron Rodgers got his first win as a Jet after they beat the Titans, and while they just lost Jermaine Johnson for the season with an Achilles tear, this defense has enough pieces to keep them competitive while the offense tries to get fully in sync. If that happens, watch out. Maybe. America's favorite team to hate plummeted from 4-12 after the Saints came into Dallas and beat the brakes off of them. In retrospect, having them at 4 last week was probably a little high, but you only had 1 week to go on. Their first 2 games, though, perfectly sums up the Cowboys and who they are. Inconsistent. Blow out the Browns week 1, get blown out by the Saints week 2. We all know they're talented, but we've yet to see them put it all together and win when it matters most in recent years, even though they're able to string them up in the regular season. Next, I have the Chargers moving up 7 spots from last week to number 11 here. They blew out the Panthers, which, yeah, whoop-de-doo, but they looked exactly like a Jim Harbaugh team so far. They're running the ball extremely well. J.K. Dobbins is awesome out there. Just hope he can stay healthy. And they are also playing great defense. Justin Herbert hasn't been asked to do as much, which is a much better spot for him to be in than being asked to, carry the entire team on his back like he has in years past. And now we move into the top 10. I'm sure everyone is going to agree with me on all 10 of these and will be extremely reasonable in the comments, right? At number 10, I have the Minnesota Vikings. I know people hear the name Sam Darnold and will immediately think 10 is too high, but if you watched them at all this year, you'll see he's playing the best football of his life. Kevin O'Connell is one of the best play callers in the NFL, and Brian Flores has that defense playing out of their minds. They lead the NFL in sacks and are tied for the 3rd most forced turnovers, plus they beat the 49ers last week in a game that nobody thought they would win. So, until they prove us otherwise, which could be as soon as this week when they play the Texans, I have them in the top 10. Next up, I have the Ravens at 9, and I know that may sound high for an 0-2 team, but it's kind of like the Bengals. I mean, these are tough losses, and they have a pretty stacked roster for the most part, especially on offense. They did just come off of a home loss to the Raiders, but hear me out. They came within a toe of potentially beating the Chiefs week 1, and were in complete control of the game against Vegas until their offense fell apart in the 4th quarter. To be fair, their defense is the real struggle, allowing 26.5 points a game through 2 weeks, which is one of the worst in the entire league. However, I'm going to put my faith in John Harbaugh, and Lamar Jackson, more than anything with this ranking, I think that they're going to get it figured out. They may not win 13 games like they did last year, but I can't see them going quietly into the night. With that said, their next 3 games are against the Cowboys, Bills, and Bengals. So I guess we'll find out who they really are sooner rather than later, because these are some tough opponents they have coming up. At number 8, I have the Saints. They're by far the biggest risers. I had them at 21 just a week ago, but they destroyed the Panthers in week 1, so we're all like, yeah, cool, it's the Panthers. Well, in week 2, they went into Dallas, where the Cowboys had won 16 consecutive regular season home games, and they embarrassed them in front of their home fan base. Their offense has put up the most points by far through 2 weeks. Alvin Kamara, dog, Olave's playing well, and Derek Carr, he's playing pretty great football. You know, you've watched him for many years previously with the Raiders, but they are a pretty piss-poor organization from a managerial standpoint. And first-year offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak has that offense humming. Now, their defense is also playing lights out, which definitely helps. Their point totals are obviously not sustainable, but we'll see if they can keep things rolling down there in New Orleans. Now at 7, I have the Saints division rival and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They too are coming off an impressive win, beating the Lions on the road in Detroit. Some say that's not a surprise, but they were definitely an underdog in this game. Literally, like, everybody picked the Lions to win. And I think we can all agree that the Lions are a better team than the Cowboys. And though the point differential wasn't as big as the Saints and Cowboys game, they showed they can go on the road and beat a quality opponent in a gritty, grimy football game. The Bucs are versatile, and they've shown that they can win in a shootout or in an ugly-ass football game that they're not supposed to win. However, you could go either way here with 7 and 8. I wouldn't be mad if you had the Saints over the Bucs, but hey, this is where it's at for me right now. Okay, I have the Eagles at 6, and yeah, I know they lost last week. They're actually moving up out of technicality because teams like the Cowboys and Ravens fell out of the top 5. You could make a case that the Saints or Bucs should be higher than them, but I'm just not ready to go there yet. They were without A.J. Brown against Atlanta and were a Saquon Barkley drop away from icing the game. They have a top 5 offense, and I expect it to stay that way, especially once A.J. Brown is back. Their defense, though, has been subpar through 2 weeks. They're 28th in passing yards allowed and 25th in rushing yards allowed, but I put their offense up with the best of them and expect them to win a lot of shootouts this year, just like they did in week 1. Though if they lose, it could very well be on the defense. To be fair, Jalen Hurts had a chance to win last week against Atlanta and threw a nasty INT into double coverage, so he is not without blame whatsoever. Got to make that part clear. Let's get into the top 5 now, shall we? Despite the loss to the Bucs, I have Detroit at 5, which is 2 spots lower than I had them last week. Jared Goff threw a pick on his first pass attempt against the Bucs and had another one near the red zone in the 4th quarter, which wasn't great. They could have potentially won that game if not for the picks, though. They can certainly move the ball, that's for sure. They had nearly 250 more yards than Tampa did and won the time of possession battle pretty handedly. They're 16th in points per game and have the 2nd most yards through 2 weeks. I think as the season moves along, we'll see their point total gets closer to where it was last year when they were 5th in scoring. Next, I have the Texans moving up 2 spots to number 4 after their Sunday night win over the Bears. Their points allowed is a little inflated after the 2 50-plus yard touchdowns they gave up to the Colts in week 1, but they're tough to move the ball on, ranking 3rd in yards allowed. They have the best receiving room in the NFL, or you could at least argue the case, and the only thing keeping them from being a top offense in the league is their O-line. Laramie Tunsil is one of the best tackles in the game, but the unit as a whole has struggled to protect C.J. Stroud so far, as they're tied for the 3rd most sacks allowed. Despite that, they're still 11th in scoring and 9th in yards. Plus, they're the 3rd best team in the red zone so far. And if they can keep Stroud upright, this team could go a long way this season. Next up, I have the Bills at 3. After they dominated the Dolphins on Thursday Night Football, Josh Allen looks as good as ever, and despite losing Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis this offseason, they still have the 3rd highest scoring offense and so far a top 10 defense to go along with it. They may not have a true number 1 target for Josh Allen at this point in time, but he's spreading the ball around and they're very unpredictable on offense. If Patrick Mahomes didn't exist, Josh Allen would probably have a Super Bowl ring by now, but unfortunately, Pat is alive and well, so while I don't know if the Bills are a Super Bowl team this year, don't be surprised if it's the Chiefs and Bills in the AFC Championship game. Then at number 2, this was tough, but I'm going to leave the Niners at the 2 spot. though they could have fallen a bit here, coming off of a loss. I think with the team they have, even with CMC on IR and Deebo Samuel now also banged up, they're going to remain a top contender for quite a while. Their defense is tied for 15th in points allowed with 21 points per game. And sure, they just lost, but it was to the Vikings by 1 score, and I think the Vikings are humming right now. So it was tough to justify ranking the Bills over the Niners yet, even though Buffalo is looking solid and on the rise. Don't get it twisted, though. The NFC still runs through the Niners. I know Jordan Mason has looked phenomenal. He's second in rushing yards through 2 games, but CMC adds another dimension to this offense, and once he's healthy, I think they're going to be hard to stop. And I also think they're playing it safe with him and making sure he's healthy down the stretch because they, just like most of us, expect them to make yet another deep run in the playoffs this year. However, if they lose again, they're dropping on this list for sure. And finally, at the top of the mountain, I still have the back-to-back defending Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. They beat 2 tough AFC North opponents in the Ravens and Bengals and still belong at the top spot until they lose at least a game or 2, which I hope doesn't happen at all, but you know, it's the NFL. It is what it is. Now, I'm not without my concerns here. Left tackle, the rookie left tackle Kingsley Suamataia had a pretty rough game against Bengals pass rusher Trey Hendrickson. Running back Isaiah Pacheco got injured at the end of that game and just got placed on IR after breaking his fibula and needing surgery. Mahomes has thrown back-to-back uncharacteristic INTs. In both of these games, Kelsey's been quiet. Then, of course, Hollywood Brown is also out for the season. That makes it tough on the offense, but I think they're going to figure it out. Kelsey's double-teamed like every single play and has had some nice plays made that were negated by penalties. Now, the Chiefs are tied for 20th with the Falcons in red zone TD percentage, so that is something that also needs to improve, as does the defense's ability to successfully cover tight ends. They have been scorched by tight ends in the middle of the field, and it is a definite problem. Hopefully they can get it figured out, but it's been tough sledding so far. Their defense now has given up 22.5 points per game, which is a dip from last year where they just allowed 17. However, right now they are averaging 26.5 points per game on offense, which is 6th in the entire NFL, and so they remain the top team of all teams to knock off these rankings. And with that, here's a graphic with every single team and their current ranking. Make sure to let me know your thoughts on these, who you agree with and disagree with, and I'll see y'all next time.